Okay, so let's dive into a section of Genesis that is just packed with drama. I mean, you've got a birth, a death, a pretty shocking family scandal, and then this long list of names that just seems to stop the story in its tracks. But what if I told you there's a key to unlock a hidden story here, one that's way richer and more surprising than what you see on the surface?
It all kicks off with this incredibly powerful and honestly heartbreaking moment. Rachel, who is Jacob's most beloved wife, is dying in childbirth. And with her very last breath, she names her son, a name that is just soaked in grief. But his father Jacob steps in and immediately changes it.
And this is our way in. You have one child, but two completely different names given in the exact same moment. So why the change? This single question, believe it or not, opens up a whole world of meaning that's hiding just beneath the surface of the text.
Now, our guide on this journey is the legendary medieval commentator Rashi, and you can almost think of him as a detective. He shows us how these ancient stories are built with this incredible psychological depth. So with his help, we're not just going to retell a story, we're going to learn how to read it all over again.
So, let's start with that first critical scene, the birth of Jacob's final son, which is so tragically tangled up with the death of his mother.
So here's the contrast you've got. Rachel's name, Ben-Oni, it means son of my sorrow. It's her final cry of pain. But Jacob renames him Benjamin. And Rashi explains this has two layers. First, son of my right hand, a symbol of strength, but also son of the south. Now this is key, because Benjamin was the only one of Jacob's sons to be born in the promised land of Canaan, which was to the south. So with one little name change, Jacob literally transforms a legacy of grief into a symbol of hope and arrival.
Okay, so the story then shifts from this really personal tragedy to a huge family scandal. And just like with the names, what looks like a straightforward crime, well, it's anything but.
The verse is pretty shocking. Reuben, Jacob's firstborn son, commits this terrible act with his father's concubine. The text is so blunt, it seems like an open and shut case, right? Reuben has disgraced himself and his whole family.
This is where reading closely just changes everything. Rashi looks at this verse and asks a simple question. Did Reuben really do this? Or is the text trying to tell us something else entirely? So Rashi completely reframes the whole event. He says after Rachel's death, Jacob moved his primary bed from her tent to the tent of Bilhah, her maid. Reuben saw this as a massive insult to his own mother, Leah. So in protest, he didn't sleep with Bilhah. He went and moved his father's bed out of her tent. The text considers this act of public disrespect so severe that it describes it as if he had committed the more shocking sin. It's an act of protest, not of passion.
And here's the proof. Right after this incident, the text says, now the sons of Jacob were 12, and then it lists all of them. Rashi argues this is the text's quiet way of telling us, hey, they were all righteous. Reuben's act was about family honor, not depravity. And that act kept the family unit whole.
Now the story takes this really sharp turn. It pauses Jacob's whole narrative to give us an entire chapter on his estranged brother, Esau. And on the surface, honestly, it looks like one of the most boring parts of the entire book. Just a long, long list of names.
We get this long, dry list of Esau's wives, his sons, his grandsons, all the clans that came from them. It just feels like a total interruption. Like, why is this here?
But again, we have to ask the question, why? The text doesn't waste space. If this long, seemingly boring list is here, there has to be a reason. What story is it really trying to tell us?
And this is where Rashi turns a boring genealogy into a total scandal sheet. Behind these names, he uncovers this whole web of deceit. He says Esau's wife Judith had her name changed to hide her idolatry. Another wife was basically named for her idol worship. And his wife Oholibamah, the product of an incestuous union. And his grandson Korah, turns out he was illegitimate. All of a sudden, this boring list becomes a hidden, biting critique of Esau's entire family line.
All right, now for the final puzzle. And trust me, it's the biggest one. After detailing all this family drama, the text goes back to Jacob. It records a major event, but as we're about to see, the timing is, well, it's all wrong.
The narrative tells us that Jacob finally gets back home to his father, Isaac, and then Isaac dies at 80 years old. Jacob and Esau even come together to bury him. It seems like a nice, neat, chronological end to the chapter.
But then Rashi drops this bombshell.
It's one of his most famous principles. He basically says that the Torah doesn't always follow a strict A then B chronological order. Sometimes events are placed next to each other for thematic reasons, not because they happen one right after the other.
And then Rashi does the math. Jacob was 120 when his father Isaac died. But we learn later in the text that Jacob was only 108 when his beloved son Joseph was sold into slavery. You see what that means? It means Isaac was still alive for 12 years after Joseph disappeared. He actually lived through his son Jacob's deepest, darkest grief. So Isaac's death is placed here not for chronology, but to close his chapter before the story pivots entirely to Joseph. I mean, that insight completely changes how we read the whole saga that follows.
So, after digging through all these hidden details, renamed sons, misunderstood scandals, totally twisted timelines, what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, this way of reading, it shows us that these ancient texts aren't just flat chronicles of events. They are absolutely dense with psychological insight. A little changed name or a strange turn of phrase can be a clue to a whole hidden story. The order of events is deliberately crafted to have the biggest thematic punch. And, maybe most importantly, reading this way means we're joining a conversation with thinkers like Rashi that has been going on for 1,000 years.
But here's what makes this tradition so powerful and so human. For all his genius, Rashi isn't afraid to admit when he's just stumped. At one point in this very section, he's confronted with a repetitive phrase, and he simply writes, "I do not know what this is intended to tell us." It's this moment of just profound intellectual honesty. The goal isn't to have all the answers, it's to keep asking the questions.
Which leaves us with a final thought. Are these stories fixed things, just set in stone, or do they only reveal their true depth, their true drama, and their true humanity when we have the courage to slow down, to ask why, and to look for the story behind the story?